a book that may cause an outbreak of healthy, sustainable communities. At least I hope so, because that's why I wrote it. My new book, The Force is With Us, 13 Exercises in Collective Care and Group Effectiveness, will be out shortly, so stay tuned. My site for more information, some of which is absolutely free, is www.swallowsongs.com. Now, you're watching The Story We Tell Ourselves, and it's the first of a 6-part video series that explores the question, does new and emerging science support social justice and community organizing? The series introduces and discusses a few of the ideas that I explore in my recent writings, which look at how some hard science findings have what I think are significant implications for activism, community organizing, collective self-care, and really so much more. And what I'd like to do in this first session of the video series is to reclaim the concept of science. And now, in my workshops, I like to start off by asking people to consider the 2 hemispheres of the human brain, the right and the left brain. And I do this because it helps us understand that there are at least 2 ways of thinking about the world. Actually, there's way more than 2 ways, but this is just a start, and it's a way that can help us consider how different science, which actually means knowledge, can be thought about across cultures, right? So, how do the left and the right brain differ? How do they function differently? So let's take a brief look here. The left side of your brain is logical and rational. It likes hard facts, especially when they're sequential and ordered. If information doesn't come that way, it will attempt to organize it accordingly by color, shape, size, numerical value, or whatever. Your left brain is linear and tends to see things in terms of their cause and effect. So viruses cause colds, for example, or human beings need to consume specific amounts of food from different food groups in order to stay healthy. The future does not interest your left brain, which is concerned with the past and the present. Your left brain likes to think of itself as objective, that it can position itself outside of what it senses and observes. It doesn't develop emotional attachments to the information that it manages. The left brain is analytical, methodical, and diagnostic. It's concerned with accuracy and interested in how the small parts of something contribute to the functioning of the whole. So, how do atoms form molecules? How do molecules form cells in our bodies? How do cells affect the way that our organs function? And so on. So your left brain learns about something from analyzing its parts. Your right brain, on the other hand, and by the way, my son Leith Martin is the one that did this graphic for me, so I have to give him credit. Anyways, so your right brain is both intuitive and random. It likes looking at how things relate to each other. So your right brain sees the world as a kind of a spider web where every strand has a crucial role in the web's function. Where you're cold, for example, might be the result of many factors such as exposure to a virus, low immunity, as well as emotional stress. Where your experience of being sick might, feed you some life lessons, about how to take better care of yourself or how to take better care of, the next person in your life who falls ill. The right side of your brain is very subjective and involved in what it senses. So it's relational. It sees connections, interactions, and interdependence. The right brain reacts to and is influenced by the information it processes. It's also concerned with aesthetics, emotions, and creativity. You're able to fantasize, dream, and imagine thanks to your right brain, and your right brain can plan for the future. Finally, your right brain understands something by looking at the big picture and how the whole interacts within a larger system. So, for example, if you want to understand a plant, you observe that plant in its environment, over its life cycle, across seasons. You'll see where it grows, what grows with it, how it interacts with other plants, insects, or animals. And from that, you might learn a great deal about that plant. At first glance now, it's easy to see that the two sides of your brain approach the world from seemingly opposite, maybe even conflicting points of view. In most of us, one side of the brain is more dominant than the other, influencing which information we take in, how we take it in, and what we do with it. And if we look at the dominant society, we pretty much see that the left brain skills tend to be more valued. Certainly in schools, anywhere in the world, wherever you went to school, I don't think it would be hard to argue that left brain skills are actually developed far more than right brain skills. And with what we know about neuroplasticity, that has some, significant implications for our personal and social development, but we'll discuss that later in an upcoming video. For now, I'd like to look at scientific paradigms or knowledge paradigms and see how they correspond with the right and the left brain framework. So, if we look at how the prevailing culture understands what science is, we look at the dominant side of that slide, what science is, what science isn't, and what role it plays in our society, we'll find something that's very similar to the left brain paradigm. In the dominant culture, science is concerned with measuring and counting, like what quantities of medication produce the desired results, how many stress hormones can our body tolerate without negative consequences, and for how long. Mainstream science tends to be reductionist in that it looks at how the parts contribute to the whole, sometimes extracting the pieces and separating them out in order to study them. So, for example, removing organs to dissect them or looking at the behavior of cancer cells under a microscope. Plants are taken out of their environment for study. They're cut up, they're broken down, they're studied in labs. Mainstream science tends to be linear in its search for causality, exploring whether A leads to B, leads to C, for instance. How does the breast cancer gene lead to cancer? Does it lead to cancer? So this science is further concerned with replication and provability. Is there an ordered sequential set of events in a specific context that cause the same results every single time? Is it provable? Can it be duplicated? Finally, mainstream culture sees science as a completely different field of knowledge, separate from, for example, philosophy, art, religion, and others, right? Now, in looking at relational paradigms, I'm going to focus on indigenous science, although some people don't use that word to describe indigenous knowledge, but the word science comes from the Greek word knowledge, and all peoples have legitimate, valid knowledge. At the same time, I think that the concept of science as it's understood in mainstream society is too limiting to apply to indigenous knowledge. And I also have to say that indigenous knowledge, has been devalued and denigrated and ridiculed for centuries, while at the same time, it's been stolen and reframed and repackaged and sold. And I give some examples of this in my book, so I won't belabor the point here, but my point is, if it is all that worthless, why are people so keen on, packaging it and selling it back to us? But anyways, Dr. Gregory Cajete, who's Tewa and the author of a book called Native Science, describes science as nothing more than a story about the world and our relationship to it. So indigenous science and other, knowledge traditions that are similar that come out of this relational paradigm basically tell a story that is less concerned with measuring and counting than with finding and participating in patterns, cycles, and rhythms, natural rhythms. In the relational worldview, we understand that everything transforms, everything changes, and that's ongoing in all aspects of life. Nothing stays the same or remains still. Everything shifts, moves, and undergoes complete makeovers. What's true today might not be true tomorrow. What one person experiences might be unique to that person, and no one else is going to have that same experience in the same way. From an indigenous or relational point of view, the more we two-leggeds align ourselves with the rhythms and the cycles of the natural world, coexisting in harmonious ways with other life forms and the planet herself, the more knowledge is revealed to us and the more wisdom we developed to guide its application. As most of us know, Indigenous peoples look at how everything and everyone connects to and influences each other through a complex set of relationships. So it's like that spider web that we discussed earlier. Consequently, attempting to exert control over our world becomes a futile exercise. We can never account for all the interactions that impact our reality, and consequently, we could never plan and compensate for them. In fact, an ever-changing, constantly shifting environment is actually desirable because it ensures the ongoing creation, development, and regeneration of life. And I'll talk about this more in my writings. But Indigenous knowledge ways are more concerned with the holistic big picture than its component parts. So we look at plants and animals again in their environment to learn about them. And the volume of knowledge that many Indigenous people have about their environment is staggering and many times surpasses mainstream science in many ways at many levels. Also, from an Indigenous point of view, science, spirituality, art, philosophy, ceremony, and many other fields of knowledge are connected to, influence, and interact with each other. So, in fact, they aren't even understood as separate fields. Ceremony and art, for instance, are ways in which information can be asked for, received, processed, applied, and even created. Different fields of knowledge cannot be separated any more than one can draw a line between a wave and the ocean that formed it. So, moving along here, one of the most significant underpinnings of relational knowledge ways is, in contrast to materialism or the study of matter, a concern with energy. So the science of the dominant culture is increasingly becoming convinced that if we want to understand more about our world, we need to focus less on the particles and the matter that we keep studying, the subatomic particles and subatomic particles and so on, and focus more on the energies surrounding, governing, and comprising those particles. So there are implications for whether you're looking through the lens of materiality or the lens of energy as you study the world. And as I say, increasingly even mainstream science is coming to understand that it is energy and energy fields that determine the behavior of matter in our universe. Perhaps when you were in grade school, you might remember doing an experiment where iron shavings were placed on top of a sheet of paper and a magnet was moved underneath. So the magnet determined the behavior of the iron shavings. It's also similar to, when you turn up the music, particularly, the bass on your speakers, and you see how sound, makes objects in your room vibrate, and even you can feel like you're vibrating. So this is the idea of how invisible energy fields determine how the physical world functions. And with new technologies, we're increasingly able to detect and measure these energies at work. Mainstream science is catching up to Indigenous knowledge and finding that energy in its various forms, such as magnetism and electricity, as well as the thoughts and feelings, that occur in our bodies, determines how matter behaves. So, of course, these two ways of understanding science are generalizations about, these two polarized knowledge ways, and don't speak to the reality that the knowledge ways aren't that polarized, actually. There are exceptions, there's common understandings, and there's increasing communication across cultures around these issues. Environmental scientists certainly acknowledge the interdependence and the interconnectedness of all living systems on planet Earth. Now, one important piece of information, if we go back to looking at right and left brain, is that we know that the more cooperation and communication there is between the left and the right sides of your brain, and all over your brain, in fact, the better for both your physical health and your mental capacities. mental capacities such as helping you be a more innovative problem solver, or contributing to your creativity. So one of the questions that I ask in my work is, what if, as human cultures, with all of our different and theoretically incompatible ways of knowing, even the ones, what if we manage to communicate, to share, and cooperate across our cultures? Might we all be richer for that? And on that note, we conclude video 1, and I'll leave you with a question that you can ponder while you wait for video 2 in the series. The question is, true or false, the placebo effect only works when the illness is imagined? And I'm sure you're wondering what that has to do with social justice, and we'll get to that. But you will find out the answer in the next video, and how it's relevant to social justice as well. The next video is entitled The Internal Force. Thanks for watching, and see you soon. Bye for now.